Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
LAVA-LITE, naturally the best. Effortlessly nourish and protect your plants with a collection of totally non-toxic, environmentally friendly, sustainable, pH neutral, lightweight and 100% natural products. The collection is made up of 8 different horticultural growing and potting media and pest control products, with each continually offering the same natural benefits: thermal protection, moisture retention and control, soil conditioning, and providing a nutrient boost, as well as being completely child, pet, and environmentally safe. Learn more at lava-lite.co.uk.
Can plants be queer? Well, I don't know if you're looking for headlines here, but the big reveal is plants don't always follow the expected sexual rules or genders. And it's not a big deal for them, yet why is it for us?
So controversial. Anyway, Connor Butler, what a guy. I first met him when he was working at Chelsea Physic Garden, and he gave a group that I was on an effervescent tour of the garden, giving us some real in-depth truth on everything LGBTQ+ in the botanical world. And we finally got him here today on the podcast to talk us through how, when, and why plants can be queer or indeed not. So welcome to the podcast, Connor.
Thank you for having me.
Yay.
No worries.
Welcome, Connor. I'm really looking forward to this. Obviously, we've just given you an introduction, but we would love for you to introduce yourself in your own words for our listeners, please.
My name is Connor. I'm an ecologist. I go by Connor the Ecologist on Instagram and social media. Very original. More specifically, I'm an entomologist who is someone that studies insects, and even more specifically, I probably lean towards beetles. I've spent a lot of time studying dung beetles, but essentially I think that I've got a unique perspective on the world, because if you spend a long time studying poo, you're never going to be bored, and you're always going to be excited by being in nature. So I kind of like to try and inspire people to care about the weird parts of nature.
Cool.
Connor, are you like the what was she called? Gillian something of the insect world, because she was like Gillian McKeith. She used to study poop on TV, human poop. So you're like the Gillian of the insect world.
Maybe, although I don't know if that's a good. Not. I feel like, isn't she kind of a controversial figure?
Oh, I don't know. I don't
know.
But we're going to potentially talk controversy today anyway, because we're going to talk about whether plants can be queer or not. Yeah. So, Connor, where did it all start for you? Were you loving nature from a young age? As we talk today, I know we're going to get some really great one-liners as well, because I know that you keep beetles in your fridge, for example. And were you doing that at a young age as well? Were you driving your family crazy with all your kind of insect escapades? Kind of, how did it all start for you?
Yeah, I've always kind of been into nature. I think I've been quite lucky that half my family is Spanish, and I spent a lot of time in Spain when I was a kid. So I would always be catching frogs in the pond. That's sort of some of my early memories. And when I was slightly older, my mum would just always take me to the zoo and the Natural History Museum in Oxford, which is where I'm from. And every kind of rainy day in the school holidays was in the Natural History Museum, looking at bugs, because it was a free thing. So my mum was quite savvy with finances, and thankfully I was never bored of going to this free museum. And so I've always been interested in nature, insects, and then I studied biology, and then became an ecologist. But yeah, I've always been sort of grabbing weird things and trying to catch bugs and frogs, and keeping things in my freezer, though less my fridge. That's where all the beetles get stored nowadays.
No.
Yeah, we need to know more about that. Why are they in your freezer? What's happened?
I mean, a lot of insects, you need to look at them under the microscope to be able to identify them, and I often do that in batches. So the best way to store them and preserve them is in the freezer. And it's actually quite a humane way of dispatching them. So yeah, if you've ever lived with me, you've had to put up with me keeping beetles in the back of the freezer. I always try and store them in an old coffee can or something, so that they're kind of disguised. But for me, there's not really any difference between that and like a prawn or something. They're invertebrates, just like any other we often eat. It's just a sort of something in our brains that we've categorized some invertebrates as food and some as not food.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just one thing before we go on and talk about your study and career. Like, what is ecology? Because this is a word we hear a lot, but what exactly is ecology? Can you kind of just sum that up for us?
Ecology is the study of the natural world and the interactions between plants, animals, and their environment. So it's kind of the study of relationships and how everything works together to create the natural world that we have today.
Super. Cool.
So, you've mentioned your study and obviously that you're an ecologist, but how did your career kind of progress? So obviously you decided from, being around, great museums from when you were younger to study ecology. But, where did you go? What did you do? How did you then get into what you're doing now?
I studied biology at the University of Southampton, and my first job, which I was very lucky, I got a job out in Singapore for a company that does school field trips and ecology field trips. So I was in Singapore for about 4 years in total, working for a field trip company and then later for an environmental consultancy. So I was doing lots of biodiversity research in Singapore's rainforests, and that was really interesting. And after that, I then applied for funding for a PhD that was looking at amphibians in Malaysia. Unfortunately, COVID hit during the middle of my PhD and messed it all up. And I lost some of my funding and eventually had to call it a day. But in that time, I then moved to London and started working for the Royal Parks charity, where I was working on an environmental education campaign that was all about trying to get people to care about insects. It was called Mission Invertebrate, and it was a really great project. And then after that, I then moved to Chelsea Physic Garden, where I was the head of learning. And then now I'm freelance as an ecologist. But one of my big projects is that I am doing a biodiversity study of Chelsea Physic Garden. And I'm also doing lots of other surveys around London and trying to make people touch bugs, essentially.
Love it.
So we're going to talk about plants and insects and all of the natural world today and their different kind of like genders, assignments, sexualities. But let's get on to plants in particular first. Can you give us a top line of how plant pollination works in most instances? So which bits do what, as it were?
Sure. So pollination is essentially the transfer of sperm between individuals. So the pollen is produced on structures called stamens, and the plants also have a structure called a pistil, which contains the ovaries. So some people would say that a stamen is analogous to the male plant of the plant, and the pistil is analogous to the female part of the plant. Of course, what we're going to talk about today is whether or not that's an accurate representation of a plant. Something we'll talk more about that later. But this pollination kind of occurs by all manner of ways. So that pollen could be transferred by the wind, it could be transferred by water, it could be transferred by animals. So bees, really renowned pollinators, but actually beetles were some of the first insect pollinators way before bees were around. So magnolia, for example, is a plant that originally would have been pollinated by beetles. They're one of the really early flowering plant lineages. And in terms of the arrangement of those sexual structures, plants have a huge diversity of how those stamens and pistils are arranged on different plants.
Cool.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because, you have a plant, you put it in the garden and and magic occurs. You don't, unless you've studied it or you understand it, you don't realize how complex the system really is of pollination. And Michael was telling me, like, there's lots of different ways of different ways to pollinate a plant. And Michael was telling me that when he came on to a tour with you, you spent some time with the avocado tree. And that's an example of how a plant can change sex overnight in order to facilitate pollination. I mean, that's like mind blowing. Can you talk us through that, please?
Yeah, so 95% of plant species do not have a distinct biological sex. They're neither male or female. So 95% of flowering plants are non-binary. So they have in each flower the organs that produce pollen and the organs that produce eggs, which when fertilized become the seeds. So 95% of plants are non-binary. With avocado, they actually have something called temporal sexual expression, where depending on the time of day, influences which of those sexual organs is active. Why would they do this? Well, a lot of plants don't want to self-pollinate themselves, because if you're self-pollinating yourselves, you're just cloning yourselves, which is fine, but it means that your offspring are going to have the same adaptations as you do. And if I'm a plant that's growing in a drought-tolerant environment and I'm not very good at dealing with droughts, my offspring are going to have the same sort of abilities. But if I reproduce with another individual that might have some amazing mutation that gives it the ability to survive in hot weather, then my offspring are going to have a better chance of surviving in hot weather. So often it's in a plant's interest to mix up its genetics and produce seeds that are a hybrid between it and another plant. And so with avocado, it is a plant that is able to self-pollinate itself, but it has mechanisms to try and stop that. So for example, in the morning, the avocado may open and only the ovaries are active. So it can receive pollen from other plants, but it's not going to be able to release any pollen. And so that it can't self-pollinate itself. The flower will then close, and in the afternoon it will open up and it will be male in air quotes, and it will then be releasing pollen, but its ovaries will be closed. So it doesn't have any one point in the day where it's both releasing pollen and receiving pollen. So essentially reducing the chance that it will self-pollinate itself. It does still happen. So in Chelsea Physic Garden, there is a single avocado tree and it produces avocados every year and there's no other ones nearby. So it must be self-pollinating itself. So it's not a perfect system for avoiding self-pollination.
It's so fascinating. Like, you get a fruit on a tree or more flowers, and you don't think about the fact that there's trees that, change sex, or 95% are non-binary. Like, it's so incredible to think that this is going on in the natural world, and us humans, we're all sitting around, having stress about labeling people. Do you know what I mean? Which is like bonkers to me. But in the plant world, this is how they've survived. This is, how nature has been growing.
It doesn't ask any questions.
It just is. This is just how it is. And we always say, like, when it comes to wellness, for example, we are nature. We're not separate from it. So, we always talk about like going and immersing yourself in nature, but we are nature. We're no different. So why is there this big separation between the two? Isn't it it's fascinating and complicated, and it's like humans have complicated everything when plants have just been doing it naturally forever, which I just find incredible.
And it is, just to jump in there, Ellen, this is even another whole subject, maybe a whole podcast, but like, the fact so many people have this plant blindness that they don't even know all these things that are happening in front of them is just, it blows my mind, honestly. The appreciation of how complex the world is beneath you, around you. Crazy.
What I find
complex.
What I find interesting as well is how we're very dissociated from what flowers are. We have them all around our house. We go out to shop and buy them. But But flowers are the sexual organs of plants. That's what they use to reproduce. And the pollen they're producing is sperm. So if you have hay fever, that is an allergy to plant sperm. You're breathing in loads and loads of plant sperm. And some plants still actually have swimming sperm. So pollen has a swimming tail, and we could be breathing that in. So I think I'm amazed that people are so dissociated from that, because every time I see cut flowers and people taking a deep breath, I'm like, enjoy that. Deep breath of plant sperm.
Enjoy sniffing
that
sperm. Connor, are you basically saying that this beautiful amaryllis behind me is a penis? Is that what you're saying? There are other trees, aren't there, that change sex as well, like yew and ginkgo as well. So is that the same process as the avocado?
Not quite. So 95% of plants are that sort of non-binary plant. We call them bisexual flowers or perfect flowers. Of the 5%, a lot of them are called dioecious, which is where you have separate sex trees. So kind of analogous to a male tree and a female tree. So you have some trees that produce just pollen and some trees that just produce the seeds. Ginkgo and yew are some of those examples. The yew tree, really amazing tree found in cemeteries. The female plant produces these red arils, these sort of berry-like structures. So it's quite distinctive to tell what sex it is. The oldest tree in the UK is potentially a yew tree. It's up in a place called Fortingall in a cemetery, and it's about 5,000 years old, and it's a pollen-producing tree, so it's never produced fruits. And then about 10 years ago, they noticed right at the top of the tree, there was a single branch with red berries. So after 5,000 years, this male, air quotes, tree has become partially female and is producing fruits. And another one is the ginkgo. Yeah, so the ginkgo, really common street tree, especially in London at the moment. But they only plant the male trees because the female trees produce fruits. The fruits are quite messy and they can smell quite bad when they start to rot. So generally only male trees are planted. But there was a study where they planted about, I think it was like 600 ginkgo trees, because they wanted to look at how many seeds on a tree would become male and how many would become female. And they planted them out. They waited about 50 years and they went back and checked. And it was about 50-50, which is kind of what you'd expect. But they've then gone back another 20 years later and found that several of those male trees have now become partially female. And so it could be that a lot of our ginkgo street trees in London could also become partially female and start producing fruit, which I think is interesting, because I think ginkgo is eaten by lots of people around the world. It's a really tasty sort of seed when you can process it. We should be making the most of fruiting street trees to support local communities.
Wow. That's a really nice insight, actually.
So potentially, so of the 5% that do have separate sexes, they're still really fluid.
Okay. And I think let's, just before we move on, I just want to talk about kind of pollination again for a moment, because I think, again, thinking of that plant blindness, and people kind of, they always hear, oh, bees pollinate flowers. That feels very top line, but of course, there are many different ways things are pollinated. It can be lots of different insects, bees, butterflies, all different things, but also, like you said, by wind or through water. What are some of the more unique ways that things are pollinated that are kind of happening in front of us in our gardens? Because I feel like people just don't appreciate how this thing happens, and it's not always as straightforward as people realize. And of course, some plants have got relationships only with one type of pollinator as well. So that's actually quite perilous as well, isn't it?
I think the example I often tell school kids is that the tree that produces cacao, chocolate, is pollinated by a specific type of midge, type of fly. And so in theory, if we lost that fly, we could lose chocolate in its natural origin, natural place.
It's like a blow to the chest.
It's crazy, exactly. Yeah. So we owe chocolate to flies. But yeah, flies are such an amazing group of pollinators that don't get much credit. When it's a cold, wintry day, when there's high levels of wind, the bees will all be bunkered down, hiding, but flies will be out there pollinating. They're much more robust than bees, and they don't get the credit that they deserve.
There you go. Don't be swatting those flies around your house.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. So the original explanation of plant reproduction was explained by Linnaeus, and it was given kind of in male and female terms, as that was the understanding at the time and how society was mostly arranged as well. But during the tour that we had, a lady in the audience asked if pollen producing and seed producing could be a better term for the 2020s. What do you feel about that? Because kind of we still look at male and female plants here and there, or we liken it to as humans are. Kind of like, how do we feel about maybe different terms for some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think that I definitely try to use different terms for male and female parts of plants or male and female plants, because saying that a plant that produces pollen is male is kind of a very human-centric view of sex and nature. And the point about Linnaeus is interesting, because Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist from the 1700s, considered the father of taxonomy. And he basically wrote this huge bit of work called the Systemae Naturae, which aimed to categorize all of nature and name all of nature. Mm-hmm. And he developed a system for naming plants, which was based on the position and the number of different sexual organs in plants. And he was quite provocative with his metaphors and how he taught his students to be able to identify plants. And all of his plant identifications are comparisons to traditional heterosexual marriage. Mm-hmm. And he basically created this list of different plant groups and how they related to traditional marriage. And at the bottom of this list, you have the clandestinae, the secret marriages, and their plants. There's one called Syngenesia, and he's written the Latin example as husbands form a union with their genitals, which is a sort of parallel to homosexual love. And that's at the bottom of the list. There's also a polygynia, which is kind of a polygamy where there's husband with multiple women in a bed. That's the Latin term he's given. Yeah. And then at the very top of this list is monoandria, which is a single husband in marriage. And he uses husbands and wives as the meaning for stamens and pistils, which we'd use nowadays. And people were using those terms at the time, but Linnaeus intentionally used husbands and wives to describe these bits. And he used that as a metaphor to teach his students. And if you understand plant anatomy, it does make sense. But if you don't understand plant anatomy, all you're seeing is that the top of this list is a single husband and wife in marriage. And in the 1700s, this was the period of enlightenment where they were trying to rank and hierarchy everything in nature, from God at the top all the way to humans, different groups within humans, and then animals, plants, minerals, etc. And if you then have this list, at the top of this hierarchy is the traditional heterosexual marriage, it kind of cements that as being the law of nature, and the idea that plants have these marriages, which is ridiculous because they don't. As I've already said, the majority of plants are non-binary. They don't have distinct sexes. But this idea of plants having marriages was kind of extrapolated as the law of nature, and it's sort of why we have such a biased view of plants and nature, and we think that it follows a very human-centric view when actually it doesn't at all.
Interesting.
It's so interesting. Humans just make things up. Humans just make things up. Simple as that.
But we are really biased. So one of the examples I like to give is if you think about bees, honeybees, for example, social bees that have a queen and worker bees, what sex do you think the worker bees are? Because I ask the majority of people and they'll always say male, because if you get your information from reputable sources such as Bug's Life or the Bee Movie, all worker insects are portrayed as male. In real life, all workers are female. So the queen is female, all the workers are female. Males are only produced at the end of the summer. They don't contribute to the hive. They're just born, they leave, they mate with the new queen, they die. They're just bags of sperm. Mm-hmm. But all media, cartoons, worker insects always portrayed as male because that is the human-centric societal view of what worker animals should be, but it's not what's found in nature. So we're really biased in how we see nature, and it's kind of further biased by all the media that we consume.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like when you posed that question about the worker bees, my immediate instinct was male, but I knew that they're not male, but that's still what comes first into my mind. So, guys, did you hear that? You're basically just bags of sperm.
Quite happy with that.
You take one thing from this podcast.
We learned how to measure, and we learned that we're bags of sperm, right?
I feel like I'm coming out on top on this podcast. I'm real happy about it. Let's talk for a moment about how plants communicate with each other as well, like how this can affect their actual physical structure, which is totally incredible. And humans can learn a whole lot from the teamwork that plants can do. And I know staghorn ferns is a good example of this, perhaps. Can you talk?
Yeah, so for the last 2 years, I've been creating an exhibition at Chelsea Physic Garden called A Dash of Lavender, and it's where we sort of pick a selection of plants across the garden that have kind of links or parallels to queerness and sort of talk more about them. And one of the things I found was this staghorn fern that's growing in this tropical glasshouse. It's a plant from Australasia, grows in rainforests, and it's an epiphyte. So it's a plant that grows on trees, and often you find these trees covered in these ferns just sort of up and down their trunk. And scientists have published that they think this is the first eusocial plant. And eusocial individuals are animals or plants that live in a community, and there's 3 criteria to be eusocial. So firstly, you need to have a group of closely related individuals. So individuals in a community that are kind of genetically similar. Could be siblings, offspring, that type of thing. The second criteria is there's a division of labor. So, for example, I mentioned the bees earlier. You've got a queen bee, you've got worker bees, so a division of roles. And the third criteria to be eusocial is that you've got to have some individuals in that community that forego reproduction. So worker bees don't reproduce. So honeybees are a good example of a eusocial community. And so these ferns are also thought to be eusocial because they grow on this tall trunk of a tree. You have ones at the top of the tree have got really modified fronds, which branch out and collect rainwater. And then ones at the bottom of the colony have really modified fronds that act like a water tank and collect all of that rainwater. And then there's a shared root system that goes up and down the tree. So the ones at the top of the tree that are collecting water and diverting it down can put their roots down into the bottom of the tree where these ones are acting like a water tank.
Amazing.
And the ones at the bottom of the tree are so modified to become a water tank that they don't have any reproductive fronds. So they're foregoing reproduction in order to ensure that ones at the top of the tree have access to water. So it's a really interesting example of how plants are actually much more advanced than what we think. And we always kind of taught that everything in nature is about reproduction. It's about sex, and it's not. It's also about community and supporting other individuals. It's not just about sex.
Incredible. It's so incredible. And it's like the teamwork that we've kind of learned happens between trees or between, you know, fungi and the roots and the canopy of the trees. Like all of that is all happening around us. And we just see trees and think, oh, you know, they're just trees and they grow and they die and that's it. But it isn't. It's a whole network of community. It's incredible.
So moving away from plants a little bit onto fungi. Now, on the tour, you said that they can have one of 23,000 different genders, and the way that they mate with each other can also vary wildly as well. We've got to dig into this, Connor. Explain that, please.
Let's do it. Let's do fungi. fungi are amazing. They're neither plants, they're neither animals, so they're their own thing. They're their own kingdom, which is wild in itself. Some fungi can reproduce asexually; they can clone themselves, and there's some fungi. There's one particular one called a split-gill fungus, which they found has around 23,000 different sexes, which in fungi they're called mating types. So 23,000 possible gender variations, essentially. And why would that evolve? Well, if you are a fungi, you're growing on a log or you're underground, the way fungi reproduce is by something called hyphal touching, which is quite a nice sounding phrase, I think. Hyphal touching. So hyphae are their roots, essentially. So they touch their roots and can then swap genetic material with another individual. That then fertilizes them, and they then produce spores, which are equivalent to seeds. And these spores will then drift off through the air, land on another substrate, another bit of ground, grow into a new fungus. So you can't move, essentially. You're just touching roots. If there were two sexes, 50% of the individuals you would meet would be incompatible with you. And what if you only met one other fungi in the area? 50% chance that fungi is incompatible. If there were three sexes, then only a third of the fungi you would meet would be incompatible. And if there's 23,000 different sexes, you can kind of guarantee that every individual you meet is going to be compatible with you. So if you can't move, there's a higher advantage of having loads and loads of different sexes, because it increases the chance of you being able to mate with whoever you bump into, which is really, really interesting. So really, we're the boring ones that have been slightly limited by our number of sexes.
Yeah, that's mad. Oh my gosh.
It's crazy. We need more sexes so we can keep evolving. Let's talk about creepy crawlies, because I know that you're going to love this. Now you've told us about keeping insects in the freezer. The wood lice, for a start. Wood lice are quite casual with their gender, is that right?
Yeah, and this is quite timely. I've just delivered a woodlouse identification course yesterday, so I've already had a day where I've just been ranting about woodlice. So I'm very happy to continue. So we've got around 37 to 40 plus woodlice in the UK. I think they're absolutely amazing creatures. They're invertebrates and they're crustaceans. So they're not insects, they're crustaceans. So they're related to crabs and lobsters. They've got 14 legs. They're incredible. But scientists often struggle to find male woodlice. They only can find females a lot of the time. And that really confused them for a long time, because how would that population survive? So they did some experiments, and they would find a pregnant female woodlice, watch her give birth, and she would only give birth to females. And in another experiment, they gave a pregnant female woodlice antibiotics. And when they did that, she started producing males and females. And it turns out that a lot of woodlice are infected by a bacteria called Wolbachia. And this bacteria can only be passed on through female woodlice. It's passed on through the eggs. If it's born into a male woodlouse, a sperm is too small to pass this bacteria on to the next generation, so the bacteria will die when the male dies. But if it's born into a female woodlouse, that woodlouse will produce eggs and pass the bacteria on to the next generation. So if you're this bacteria, it's in your interest to be born into female woodlice so that you can be passed on. So in some species that are infected by this bacteria, when males are developing as eggs and they're infected with this bacteria, the bacteria turns them functionally female. So they're genetically male, but they're able to lay eggs, which is pretty wild.
Like my mind is blown. These tiny little woodlice.
Gets better. Yeah. So in some species, this bacteria goes another step, and it gives female woodlice the ability to reproduce asexually and just clone themselves. So you then just have fully female populations of woodlice. So I like to think that these woodlice have gotten sick with this bacteria, become asexual, and then overthrown the woodlice patriarchy.
I like that.
And
bacteria is seriously clever.
Yeah, and someone told me recently that global pandemics are going to become more frequent, which is really scary. But if we had the right bacteria, would it be so bad?
Absolutely. What about slugs? Because there's more to slugs than meets the eye, I think, isn't there? They don't just munch our plants.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth talking about slugs since this is a plant podcast. So firstly, like some clarification on slugs. Not all of them are bad. So there's some slugs in your garden. There's one called a leopard slug, which is a really big spotted slug. And it only eats rotting plants. So it won't eat any of your live plants. And it's a really territorial species. So it will actually keep out slugs from your garden and from its territory. And it's been known to kill slugs. So it's not all slugs are bad. Also, fun fact, a lot of slugs are more closely related to snails than they are to other slugs. So it's not like there's snails and slugs in their separate groups. Lots of snail families have independently lost their shell and become slugs. They're not a distinct group. But yeah, slugs, really, really interesting sexual behavior. So in the 1660s, there was a scientist called John Ray who first discovered that slugs were dual sexed, as he called it back then. Nowadays we call them hermaphrodites. So all slugs are, again, non-binary or dual sex. They have the ability to get pregnant and also get another slug pregnant. So you don't have male slugs or female slugs. They're all our non-binary friends.
Mm-hmm. There you go, Ellen.
Non-binary slugs, I like it.
So I have to say, Connor, well, not even surprisingly, but the queer community often overlaps with botany. And why do you think that is? Because when I was younger, to be called a pansy certainly wasn't the greatest feeling, but I feel like now I feel like I own it. There's so much overlap with those communities. What do you think about that?
I think, it's interesting that plants and flowers have such a link with queerness. Mm-hmm. I guess in the past, it was the idea that flowers are feminine. And if you're a man, being feminine is like the worst insult that you could possibly be called. And so pansy, was definitely an insult. Lavender, if someone was said to have a streak of lavender, they're often a bit camp.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that there's such a connection with plants and nature. In the, I can't remember if it's 1900s, but gay men were often called evening botanists because they would often spend a lot of time in parks and gardens in the evenings, getting up to various activities. So I think, there's a lot of connection with people and queer men, especially in parks and gardens. Yeah, I don't know why. There seems to be a big bias in people from the LGBTQ plus community in horticulture, in plant science. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I wonder what that science actually is. Yeah, interesting.
Well, I think nature just really teaches us that there's such a variation of sexualities, genders, and behaviors. And perhaps as humans, we should all follow the example more and just go with what works for each of us, just like plants and fungi and slugs.
Connor, this is so cool talking to you today, but we're nearly at 45 minutes and Ellen gets twitchy when we get past 45 minutes. But is there anything else you want to add? Are there any more kind of quirks of the botany world that you feel we just have to know about? Any odd relationships between pollinators and plants, or plants themselves, or changing sex, or anything else off the top of your head that we must know about?
I mean, there is so much stuff I could talk about, and what I would say is come on one of my tours or my walks or something.
Good idea.
What I will say is, are plants queer? Are animals queer? I don't know. Sometimes I say no, because for me, queerness is an identity, and it's kind of an artificial grouping of people. And back in the day, queerness was used as kind of like an othering to say that this group of people are queer, they're not normal. So by saying that sex changing trees are queer, I'm saying that they're not normal, and they are normal because that's natural. And so I alternate this kind of thinking that, if queer people exist, we are part of nature, and so queerness is natural. But whether or not that means that plants are queer, I don't know. I often say, no, plants are just plants. And animals are just animals. There's so many parallels between queerness in humans and things that happen in nature. But yeah, I don't know if we can call nature queer, but I think, we're no less natural as queer people than exchanging trees are. Natural or unnatural.
Oh, wow.
Or meaningless.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Humans are just humans. We are just are. We have made up labels at the end of the day. So we should just be what we are. And it's as simple as that. Connor, tell us about your tours coming up. What's coming up next so people could book on, and where can they find out more about doing that and learning more with you?
Sure, yeah. So I have an Instagram called Connor the Ecologist where I share lots of events. I've got my next guided walk is on the 8th of February in Battersea Park. It's free. It's on my website and it's on Eventbrite. But I'm also curating an exhibition at Chelsea Physic Garden called Dash of Lavender, which happens every February. And we have an exhibition. There's lots of guided walks. There's lots of evening events. So I'd recommend looking at Chelsea Physic Garden's website leading up to February.
Awesome. And that is where we met last year, and it was an amazing tour, and I learned so much, and that is why I've tried to hunt you down for 6 months solid to get you on the podcast, and here you are. So thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I think it's really kind of opened our eyes to a lot of things that happen in the plant world in terms of different sexualities and genders, but also I hope it's opened a lot of people's eyes to everything that happens around us all the time, all of those different relationships, and kind of, this is good for, breaking down gender norms, but also helping with plant blindness, which I think is a big problem in society as well. So no, thank you so much, dude. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.
Welcome to Series 17.
You wait for me to speak.
You are usually the first
because I'm so dominant.
Well, because you have some kind of punchline at the beginning.
I know.
I
was going to say Mary Spankmas. I don't know why.
That's really weird.
I know. So it's a good thing you spoke first. Anyway,
I don't want to know what you were doing at Christmas.
How are you, Ellen? We're on the A505.
I'm good, thank you. We are, aren't we? In your car, driving.
Yeah.
You're driving.
We don't have to explain.
I think that
Do you remember there was a period of time where you have to explain that you weren't driving when you were doing something?
I think we should explain because there's going to be noise in the background as well. So everyone needs to know what's going on.
So that's cool. What?
That is really cool. Tonight's episode, let's start at the very beginning. Series 17. So first episode is Connor. What a great episode.
Cool. Talking about whether plants could be queer, which was so cool because we talked about plants that can change sex, plants that are transgender, loads of different concepts. And the bottom line, the message is that kind of like nature has many different permutations, so why do we worry about those as people?
Absolutely. We are nature, so what's the difference?
And Connor is brilliant. He's just so cute. I don't know, I can't even describe it.
He was so lovely. So that was
so knowledgeable,
That was a great episode.
Just genuine.
To start the series off, happy days. So we can keep your ears full of plants for the next 12 weeks. 12 weeks, is that right? Yeah.
And we've got a lovely episode coming up all about new plants with Gary Gruber, who's a king in the new plant development world. That will be released in conjunction with a panel talk that I'm hosting at IPM Essen, all about why do we need new plants, which will be interesting. And I'll also write some blog posts as well, because Ellen, it's a big part of what I do, working with new plants and like new breeding and elements. And a lot of people often question why do we need new plants? Because sometimes the developments might be invisible. It might be the plant stores better or lasts longer, or things that you don't see, not necessarily a new colour. You know, there's a lot of invisible traits as well. So it's like going to be a really interesting episode, I believe. And we'll talk about the story of plants like hydrangea runaway bride, a few of Gary's different discoveries over the years. And yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so now we've been really serious and talked about the series with our new sponsors, which are LAVA-LITE, who we absolutely love. Let's talk about I don't want to say the C word because it's been and gone now.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about another C word, and that's Cambodia.
Okay.
Because you've been on your travels.
I have. I completely bypassed Christmas by booking a trip to Asia, which started in... I had a layover for 2 days in Seoul, in South Korea, and then started in Ho Chi Minh for a few days myself, and then joined a tour that took us through Cambodia into Thailand at the end, and it was wonderful. It's so nice. Asia, I always feel so at home in Asia, honestly. It really suits me, and of course the weather was warm, although in Seoul it was 0 degrees, but obviously in Cambodia it was like 30 or something. But yeah, just really cool and so nice. You know, on Christmas Day we were just on a bus, and nobody really mentioned Christmas, which was kind of cool.
That's why everyone was there, to bypass
exactly.
Christmas.
That's what I found quite interesting, actually. Like everyone's kind of story of why they weren't home for Christmas, sort of thing. So yeah, it was cool. But how were you? Because I heard you cooked Christmas dinner, which I find hilarious.
Like I've cooked loads of Christmas dinner. You're so mean about my cooking. Yeah, I went to my parents'.
Yeah.
And I provided a vegan Christmas dinner for parents, husband, cousin. We all had fun. It was a nice day.
Was it nut roast?
No, it wasn't nut roast.
No, I'm not joking. No, when I was a kid, for my Christmas meal, I used to have nut roast. Because you remember, I was vegetarian when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I used to really enjoy nut roast. And so that was what I would have on my Christmas meal.
Okay, but the thing is,
I haven't had nut roast for years, actually. I want to have something.
Everybody used to have nut roast for about 5 nights a week if you were vegetarian or vegan when I was young.
Yeah.
So now if someone says nut roast,
but it's wholesome.
We're always like, there's plenty of other food than nut roast nowadays.
I've got to buy some nut roast now, honestly.
Goodness me.
I used to love it.
Anyway, we had mushroom Wellington.
Yeah.
And we also had a fake turkey. Not tofurkey. It was some other fake turkey made out of mushrooms.
Okay.
And it was really
More
cool.
wholesome than I imagined.
It was shaped like a turkey, but obviously it was mushroom, and it was really, really good.
Cool.
Loads of vegetables growing on the allotment, so sprouts and parsnips. What else did we have? Leeks and potatoes.
Yeah. Oh, I love vegetables, Ellen.
Broccoli, all red cabbage, all came from my allotment.
Do you know what I'm loving at the moment?
What?
I'm loving what do you call it? Celeriac roasted.
Yeah, nice.
So cool. And just as big chips.
Yeah, lovely.
So cool. I could eat a whole celeriac.
You could eat a whole celeriac.
Easy.
And you can't beat it when it's homegrown. It tastes better. 100% it does. So yeah, that was Christmas for me, and I've been back in the UK for 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks, and I'm going back to the US tomorrow.
Oh. Nice.
Yeah.
What temperature will it be, Ellen?
About -7.
Okay. That's cold.
Oh yeah, it's cold. Yeah, it's cold. It will be really cold, but the big difference is that the sky will be bright blue with beautiful sunshine. So even though the temperature's really low, you have to wrap up warm, you never really feel
so
like it's the depths of winter because of the blue sky.
Why is it so different?
I don't know. It's a very cold time, and we're
Is it never cloudy?
Yeah, there'll be days where it's cloudy, but it's rare. It's pretty rare. February I always find is a little bit more cloudy. But you know, like in the UK we get that cloudy weather October to even March maybe, mostly.
Yeah.
There I would say maybe you get a few weeks over winter, so it's a much shorter winter.
Oh. But you know what? It's so nice to see. I see some daffodils already coming through.
Yeah.
That's so cool, because this is why it's always so nice to get Christmas out of the way, because now you can almost I almost tell the time by the flowers that start coming through, and it's just magical. And the snowdrops.
Yeah, plenty of snowdrops already.
Edgeworthia was edging as well. I saw.
Wonderful.
In where was it? In Temple Gardens.
Nice.
London. Yeah, so cool.
When I get back to the US, I'm actually going to go take a little look around the UNC botanical gardens.
Oh, cool.
Because they have really lovely winter garden, and the fragrance is absolutely stunning.
Cambridge Winter Garden. You should go there.
Yes. Obviously it's very slightly different plants, but similar to that. And just the fragrance, like your witch hazels, all that, just winter sweet. And you can walk around.
This time of year, plants, they really carry me through. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's always something happening, and then before you know it, we'll be deep in tulips, and and then it'll be petunia time,
Petunias, begonias, geraniums.
I wonder, how other people punctuate the year when they haven't got flowers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it?
I wonder, I think maybe if they're not gardeners but they have children, they probably punctuate it based upon school holidays.
Oh.
Like, the Christmas school holiday, Easter school holiday.
Yeah.
Maybe? Do you think? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I reckon.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there you go. I would imagine, because I came away before Christmas and I didn't protect any of the plants at mine, with the -7, there's going to be probably quite a lot of dead plants.
What sort of stuff?
Well, I've got this really beautiful planter that I've had for years. And it is full of some really different succulents and cacti. The cacti probably be okay, but some of those succulents will not be around anymore.
Oh, I miss this.
And depending on if it's rained or not, obviously a lot of pots I grow in containers and pots, and they dry out so quick, whether it's cold or not cold. If it hasn't rained, they'll dry out really quick and the plants will die.
But equally, containers always get waterlogged, don't they?
Well, they shouldn't.
Drainage.
We should have drainage and then lift them up on feet. They should be okay. But I don't know. Anyway, either way.
I've got 2 balconies to dress now, Ellen Mary.
Yeah. How about it?
Oh.
Have you got plans for the balconies? Can you picture them already? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've had plans.
Because I never want to litter them with too many containers, because I just want to enjoy it.
Yeah.
But then I also don't like when you have containers hanging off it.
Yeah.
Especially because it's like glass balcony, so it's like beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to break that look, as it were. So,
I've had a vision for our top deck for a while, and it's never happened because the availability of plants, time, expense. So I just put plants in that I find or people give me, and it's just a mishmash, really.
Oh la la.
So each year is different. I would love to fill it with plants, but also I'm not there all year, so I can't really do that because they'll die, or we have to rely on other people to come along and water. But it's pretty.
Yeah, true. Well, that's why with my houseplants, because I travel a lot, I put them in the bigger containers.
Yeah. Okay, well that's very nice.
I know.
Any other gossip, or we'll sign off?
I don't know. I'm doing this plant fashion show in a week or 2.
Tell us about it.
It's plants going down the catwalk on the conveyor belt.
Where will it be?
A plant line. It's like a trade event in Holland.
Okay.
And it's like one of those moments where I'm like, let's do a fashion show, and they're like, oh, f***. So it's just me blurting out stuff again, but I'm sure I'll make it happen.
I'm looking forward to seeing the photographs.
And lots of different trade events in January, to be honest. It's quite a busy little month. So it's cool, but it's so nice to be back in the saddle, because I don't know, December gets on my tits, Helen, because not just Christmas, but because nobody ever replies to an email.
They're still not replying to emails. We're in January.
People get so lazy with Christmas and stuff, honestly, and it's such an excuse of like, we'll do it after Christmas. It's like, after Christmas, they still need a bloody run-up, do you know what I mean? Honestly.
You are a major Christmas Grinch. You definitely are the worst now.
I just think it gets in the way, and also August.
August is I dislike August as a month in totality.
You've always hated August because your allotment goes mad.
Well, but
everything's a tangle.
It's just everything's a big old mess. But and for work-wise, everyone's on holiday, so no one replies to emails. You can't get anything done, but you really feel like you want to get stuff done because it's the middle of the summer. Like, let's keep moving, and no one's moving anywhere. And also, if I'm in North Carolina, the weather is horrifically hot and humid.
really?
And you can't walk out the door without, you know, looking like you've had a bucket of water over your head.
So you can't have it all, Melon.
No, you cannot.
That's when you like a UK summer.
I do prefer the UK summer.
Put that on a t-shirt.
For sure. Put that on a t-shirt. Anyway.
That is bold.
That is bold. It's a bold statement.
Oh.
Anyway, lovely chatting.
Cute, you too, darling.
Keep your eyes on the road, though.
All right, ciao, bunga. Introducing our sponsors, LAVA-LITE. LAVA-LITE Plus, the orange one. LAVA-LITE Plus is a natural grow media all-rounder. It's perfect for borders and great as a pot topper, both in the home and the garden. It offers thermal protection for cold winter nights, as well as holding up to 25% moisture. Look out for it online and in your local gardening stores. The music for the Plant-Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.